Hello and welcome to another episode of Hawking Can Survive. And this is week 3 of January 2018. And as we do, or at least as we did last year, and we're continuing this year, we are doing Shituary. Week 3 this
The
year
month where we
is.
just do a bunch of. Oh, go ahead. I
Yeah.
cut into your intro because I heard you paused, but it's for those that don't know, it's the every January we do a themed a bad month of shitty movies, and each week has its own theme. And so far, we've done talking dogs and bad animation, and the best week so far, I think, was this week.
Oh, yes. This week we did wrestler movies. Not
Or
movies
movies,
about wrestling, but movies starring wrestlers.
yes, movies starring pro wrestlers, most of which have not really acted beyond in WWE.
Right. There isn't anyone you'll see in this week who, because technically we could have pulled a Dwayne Johnson movie out of our ass or something like that.
Right.
Uh, I think the highest profile wrestler that we chose here is probably, or at least the highest profile in the United States, is probably Jesse Ventura.
Yes.
Which leads us into our first film discussion, the 1990 science fiction action film Abraxas, Guardian of the Universe.
This might have been my favorite one out of the month.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. First of all, going into this film, knowledge of what to expect.
Mm-hmm. I all I knew was I hadn't even watched the trailer. All I knew is what you told me, that it's supposed to be something special in terms of how bad it is.
The only thing I really knew about it is that Riff Tracks had covered it, and Mystery Science Theater might have. All I know is that it's really like known to be a garbage movie in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And garbage is really right. This is a movie that wanted so badly to be the next. I want to say Terminator.
It's literally Terminator in several respects.
Yeah, Terminator mixed with, I don't know, some.
It's got like Abraxas is a space cop of some sort.
Yes, he is a finder, an intergalactic
there's so much
officer.
There is so much mythology in this movie that is just mentioned and then never explored.
And that's interesting because this movie builds a whole universe behind it that most of which you never see. In fact, the only thing you see of the world of Abraxas outside of Earth is this really clumsily shot sequence of scenes in which two sort of dweeby, science-y people explain what's happening in the plot.
Well, yeah, and then there's this. Well, first of all, the villain of the piece, he just touches a lady in her stomach and impregnates her, and this kid is supposed to be what did he call him?
Oh, yeah, he's supposed to be called. Oh shit.
Well, first of all, by doing this, the bad guy Secundus, which is Latin for second, for some reason, he's looking for the anti-life equation, which means nothing in this movie except that it's the sort of MacGuffin that is mentioned 2 or 3 times. I'm trying to find what it's. Oh, the culminator is what the baby is called. That's his title as a being is. But Secundus, played by Sven-Ole Thorsen, has a kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. He's like, "You are the culminator," but again, in the context of this movie, it means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, no. I mean, the only thing I assume is the anti-life equation in Abraxas has something to do with like just the end of the world or something like that.
I was reading up on it, and I guess that by accessing the second life equation, or whatever it's called, Secundus will gain access to a negative zone and become immortal.
Mm-hmm.
Which
so basically, the movie opens up with this sequence in which in which these two finders, one Abraxas and one Secundus, are basically on Earth, and Secundus is looking for a woman to mate with, and he finds this woman and hand rapes her by putting his hand over her belly. She becomes pregnant immediately and gives birth a minute later.
Yes.
And what Secundus's plan is, I found the name. He's trying to create a co-mater. A co-mater is basically a child who holds the anti-life equation.
Okay. Cool.
And by the way, drink every time someone says co-mater in the movie.
Yes.
In fact, drink every time
also...
someone says Abraxas or Secundus.
Yes. The movie does open, you could also take a drink for every time something blows up, which will get you soundly wasted within the first 10 minutes.
Yes.
Because it opens with a shootout in the snow, and every gunshot causes this spectacular fireball.
Yeah,
in the environment.
The assumption that you make is that they're using, sci-fi weapons that are more powerful than anything that those of us on Earth are familiar with. And of course, later in the film, they do insinuate that human weapons are not particularly effective.
Right. It's a shame that you only see these mega weapons in the first part of the movie, because, ostensibly they blew the pyrotechnics budget in the first 10 minutes of the movie, and then again, you use the rest of it in the last 10 minutes. And there's a little bit here and there.
Ate up because there is this wonderful bullshit explanation where so basically what happens is the film fast forwards to about 5 years later or something. And when
8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. And suddenly, basically Secundus is returning to seek out the co-mater, and he comes back to Earth, and Abraxas is sent there is sent there to stop him. And now his handlers want him to kill the kid, but he won't, just because he's Jesse Ventura and he doesn't kill kids.
Right.
And instead he wants to take care of Secundus, who for some arbitrary reason they're not allowed to murder each other as finders. That's I guess finders are exempt from murder, even though clearly Secundus deserves murdering because he's killing a ton of people.
And Secundus does try to murder Abraxas.
And he
impales him with a broken lamp. I did love when the two of them both come back down to Earth. They, in slow motion, explode screaming out of the water, which was one of the funniest things I've seen in a very long time. Just, what's going on?
It reminded me a lot of the scene in Raising Arizona when John Goodman and I forget the other actor's name break out of prison. They're like crawling out of the mud screaming.
Yes.
And it's meant to be this whole symbolic birth kind of thing.
Yes.
And it was like that, but imagine if that was done by directors with much less talent.
And directors here's the thing about Abraxas is that it toes the lines so bizarrely on whether or not it's in on the joke. Like there are moments where you think like, wait a second, there's no fucking way they were being serious about that part. And it's a very funny movie, and oftentimes genuinely funny. And you're never 100% sure if that humor was intentional or if some idiot thought it was awesome and they were the only person in the world that thought so.
And a good chunk of this movie is spent dealing with just the relationship that Abraxas is starting to form with the kid and his mother. And it's painfully obvious. And a ton of the humor comes from the fact that Jesse Ventura is just not leading man material. His deft with handling dialogue is something to behold. I really wish I had the talent that the comedian James Adomian has in his Jesse Ventura impersonation, but it's All I'm saying is, it's hard to get romantic dialogue when your voice is something like, something like, "Well, I'm trying to meet the coal mater."
Or there's also that part, of course, where speaking of developing a relationship with a kid, he's sitting in bed shirtless and invites the kid to come over and sit next to him.
"Hey boy, why don't you come here and sit next to me on my bed?"
Can't sleep, huh?
"Oh, can't sleep, huh? Well, why don't you come on Daddy's bed? Sit on Santa's lap."
I did want to mention too earlier in the movie, speaking of the pyrotechnics budget, this inexplicable scene where the mom is playing with her kid, the culminator, in the park, and this montage of them playing in the park is just intercut with things blowing up.
Yes.
There's they're playing, and then there's a shot of something like in a factory just blows up, and there's really no explanation for it. I think in hindsight, you could call it foreshadowing, but it's not thematically relevant at all. It's just an excuse to blow more things up.
Remember when Jim Belushi shows up for no reason for one scene?
That was at the time he was married to the actress playing the mom, and he did it as a favor.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Yeah, that was a scene that was useless.
Yeah, it was funny though.
Oh yeah, it existed solely to give Jim Belushi a scene, a comedic scene, and what was funny was not the scene itself, but how unfunny the scene was.
Yes. Well, then he's talking about how the son is picked on at school, and the mom's like, "Have you just tried telling the kids to stop?" And he just thinks for a second, he's like, "No, I didn't think about that. That's a good idea. I'll try that." And that's one of those scenes where you're not sure if that was supposed to be like funny, like, "Oh, look at this dumb school principal who's in this comedic scene," or if that was supposed to be a serious moment of how differently abled kids are misrepresented in the school system by their
in the Facebook generation. You would post an image of the Joker that just says "not sure if serious."
Yeah, exactly. There's so many of those moments in this movie, but the movie as a whole is hilarious. And of course, in terms of it being like a Terminator film, Secundus has his entire arc on Earth is that fish out of water Terminator stuff from the first movie at the very beginning, and in the third movie as well, where he orders a ton of food. She's like, "Here's your bill," and she's like, "I didn't order that," and she's like, "Well, everybody gets one." He's like, "Oh, okay," and he just takes it and eats it and walks away.
That scene, that was, I admit, when he ate the bill, I thought that was funny.
That was funny. I mean, I laughed a lot during this movie, and I will probably watch it again. And if I had a way to own it forever, I would. I mean, I'm gonna start prowling about some pawn shops in the area and see if I can find a VHS. I don't know if it was ever pressed to DVD or Laserdisc. But
I've seen it on DVD before, but it's one of those things that probably went out of print. It's worth noting it was hard to find a copy of this movie, and thankfully the YouTube gods shined a light on us for that moment. But if I preferably would have liked to have seen it through legitimate means.
I would have too. Yeah, I'm gonna try to find it, but I mean, you can't even buy it digitally on Amazon. The only digital version of the movie on Amazon is the one with the riff tracks.
Right, and don't get me wrong, riff tracks is fine and all, but you have to provide the non-riffed version too.
Yeah,
I'm a strong believer in. While I enjoy Mystery Science Theater and riff tracks and such, in general, I kind of like to see the unriffed version of the movie first, unless it's something that I have absolutely no basis to go on, or if it's something that is so boring that it needs the riff.
Yes.
I for a perfect example, I don't think anyone in real life has actually sat through a viewing of Manos, The Hands of Fate, without falling asleep, except for the people who watched the Mystery Science Theater version.
Yes. It does look like Abraxas is available on DVD for $7 on Amazon Prime.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I couldn't find at the time. Maybe it was just out of stock or something. Well,
there's only 3 left, so
that limited stock.
Yes. So I'm gonna buy one right
now. Yeah, this is a movie to show to friends. So I think we can go ahead and move on to our next one, unless you have any closing thoughts on it.
No, but I'm buying this right now because I absolutely loved it. This is one of the funniest movies I've seen in a very long time, and I highly recommend it.
All right, Secundus. Goddamn. All right. So the next movie we watched, I have to say, while it wasn't on the level of Abraxas, River of Darkness was pretty freaking hilarious.
Yes, it's in its different way. It was. It's not as bombastic as Abraxas, but it's the filmmaking is a lot worse,
Yes,
even down to the lighting.
Yeah, Abraxas is a poorly written film and a poorly acted film, but direction-wise, I would say it's no worse than your average mid '80s kind of low budget actioner, straight
Yes,
to video movie. This though, this movie is friggin' incompetent. And
yes,
River of Darkness stars Kurt Angle as the
yep.
sheriff in a small town that suddenly is being confronted with murders that are ravaging the town and supposedly being done by basically the zombified versions of these people who were weren't they supposedly like murdered.
They were accused of like raping a girl, and then in retaliation, the townspeople murdered them,
Mhm.
even though they were innocent, and they're coming back as revenge to kill uh, kill the people that led the charge to accuse them. I think.
Yeah, okay.
It's like I have no idea. Like at some point they mentioned it, and it
and,
was one throwaway conversation.
and one of the zombies is Kevin Nash.
Mm-hmm.
um, and Sid Vicious, I think, isn't he also in there?
Yes.
Yes, Sid Vicious is also in there. He's credited in it as Sid Udy, but
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah. Anyway,
It's go ahead.
so this movie is how to describe it except what it feels like at first, and what I seriously thought the film was going for at first was like, is this going to be like a religious film? Because it has the cinematography and the style of a lot of these movies that have been coming out in the last few years by like Faith Productions, and it, it turns out no, this movie is straight up uh, about demon possessed killers and
But there is mention of God and hell as well.
oh yeah, well I mean, so it might have been, but if it is, then it's one hell of a daring company that's doing it. Maybe it's
I
sort of
wonder if it was I wonder if it was a script that started out as a sheriff, learning to find God after the townspeople don't trust him in solving a mystery, and then uh, TNC or whatever the wrestling company at the time bought it and just completely reworked it into a murder movie with wrestlers.
honestly, I wouldn't be that surprised, just because of the fact that his character that Angle plays is not a religious man, and they make it point several times, and they're like, "Oh, you're not a godly man," and
Yes.
like his character arc is him basically finding God and murdering these zombies.
Yes. One thing
Except,
I noticed about the movie is that a lot of the characters don't know what to do with their hands while they're talking or just doing nonverbal acting. So they have interesting use of props where they just kind of mess around with whatever they're holding. Like the guy in the boat, he's kind of like almost drumming on his hand with his wrench he's holding or the screwdriver he's holding while
yeah,
he's waiting for his friend. It's very strange. And then the guy with the toothpick doing the same thing with the wrench or the pliers he's holding.
and
It,
I like how the film goes very strongly for the the whole town was in on it angle, and suddenly these people who were nice to him are now basically saying the entire town wants Kurt Angle's head for some
yes.
reason, and it's telegraphed in a big way, and there's no subtlety to it. And the only thought on my mind is, what is this guy still doing in this town? Because it's clear that nobody here cares for his safety.
Yeah, he goes to a diner and he asks for coffee, and he's ignored by the cook. And then he leaves, and after he leaves, the guys are like, "Oh, good luck, sheriff." They kind of laugh at each other. It doesn't make any sense until explained later that it was between the cook and the current sheriff over in the sheriff's election, and the cook is sour about it. If that was the cook, I mean, I think there's two different actors in this movie that look very similar, and I kept getting them mixed up. Either that or the same guy.
Another thing that's interesting, I mean, and to an extent, maybe they were going for a High Noon kind of thing, where in High Noon, the sheriff finds out that these criminals are coming back to town, and they have revenge in mind, and the sheriff spends the majority of the movie begging the townspeople to render him assistance, and none of them help, and then finally he has to take them on himself.
Yes.
And maybe they were going for that, but
maybe
somewhat incompetently. There's this other subplot involving paranormal investigators who are clearly these central casting porn stars.
Yes.
I mean, put a pair of glasses on them and call them a professor, but it's not going to be believable if they can't act.
Right.
In fact,
I guess the last thing.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you.
I was going to say the other thing I wanted to say about the movie is the dialogue and the line reading.
Mm-hmm.
With one of the best ones being early on, where they're fixing an engine or something, and one of the guys is like, "Tighten it," and the other guy's like, "It's tight as a frog's ass."
Which begs a question: how does he know that?
Yes, that's a very weird and specific analogy to use.
I mean, I know I've seen that YouTube video of the monkey and the frog, and well, that's not. It doesn't end well for the frog. Let's just say that. But that was also the frog's mouth. Oy.
And the set design, especially in Kurt Angle's office, was really funny. It's just a room with stuff in it, and then a desk in the middle of that room.
Yeah.
It is amateurish in every single way.
And when you say room, it looked like it was somebody's house.
Yeah.
It didn't look at all like a actual office or police.
No, not at all. It looked like a spare room.
Mm-hmm. But so that movie was fun to watch, and I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to see it, but if you're looking for a wrestler starring trash movie, certainly watch River of Darkness over the next film we have on our list.
Before you mention that next film, I will actually say I would recommend River of Darkness if you're in the mood for something hilariously shitty.
It does hit that angle to an extent. That
Kurt Angle?
Huh?
Yeah.
So, the low point of this week was Knucklehead.
Which wasn't as low as the other movies from previous weeks.
Yeah, it was.
Less interesting as a bad film.
Knucklehead is...
It is a early 2000s ass, PG-13 ass movie.
Oh yeah, it's early 2000s in the way it's presented, but it's a 2010 movie.
Huh. I did not know that.
In fact, actually, I would argue the plot came from the 90s. I wouldn't be surprised if this script was written in 1998.
Do you remember when, like Albertsons and grocery stores like that had those video stores, and there's the VHS was in those cardboard sleeves, and the VHS itself in the cardboard sleeve was in a sort of a plastic sleeve, and you had to squeeze the edges of the sleeve to pop out the video?
Yeah.
You remember those?
Yes.
This is a movie that you would find in a video store in King Soopers with that type of case. Or Kroger if you live in your half of the country. Actually,
the grocery chain in our area, Jewel Osco, is owned by Albertsons. So
okay, yeah, I have King Soopers and Safeway.
Was owned by Albertsons. Now I believe they're both owned by Super Value or something like that.
I know Safeway owns Albertsons.
No, Safeway is its own thing. I think I don't believe they.
No, Safeway and Albertsons are definitely the same company now.
Geez, I can't keep track of all this.
In any case, it looks like this is the type of movie that would be in those video stores with those weird cases because it has that kind of run of the mill. There's a lot of films like this. It has the same beats as many of those movies and a lot of the same jokes as well. But I mean, we didn't talk about what it's about, so go ahead.
So the plot of this movie is a less interesting Kingpin.
Yeah, kind of with boxing.
Yeah,
and wrestling. Well, I guess wrestling, yeah, not boxing.
Yeah, I guess it's just fighting, like generic fighting. I wouldn't even call it wrestling.
Yes, generic fighting.
Because so basically, Walter Crunk is a down on his luck 35-year-old orphan who's lived in this orphanage since childhood, and he's basically and he's played by the Big Show, and he's this kind of basically he's a man-child. Yes. And meanwhile, this guy named Eddie Sullivan is a down on his luck trainer, and he owes a lot of money, and he needs to get that money in order to pay some gambling debts. And so he, in desperation, turns to Crunk to fight for him in a bunch of fights, and then they hit the road driving. Basically driving to New Orleans for this big fighting competition and taking any fight on the way to make money for the road. This is Kingpin.
It's a boring movie.
Yeah, but this is seriously, this movie rips off Kingpin. It's just not funny or creative like Kingpin was.
No, not at all. There's one genuinely funny scene in the whole movie, I think. Which is the one you mentioned to me.
Oh, you're going to mention the scene in the bus?
Yes, where he has a very large buffet dinner and pays for it on the public bus later on.
So, as a rule, fart and shit jokes are the lowest of the low rung in comedy, but you can earn those jokes if you take an interesting twist on them. And the one funny scene in this movie involves the Big Show, who is a very large man and certainly would not fit in a conventional Greyhound bus bathroom, squeezing himself in and just unable to shut the door. He's halfway sticking out of the bathroom stall and just unloading on that bathroom while crying and screaming and just apologizing to everyone he sees,
begging for forgiveness.
Yes, and the reactions made by everyone on the bus, it's sold because of the reactions. Because I mean, one of the best lines in that is after it cuts to the outside, like everyone's abandoned the bus. This woman starts screaming like, "My dogs are on that bus."
Yes.
Yeah,
that was good. But other than that, I mean, I barely laughed anywhere else in the movie. I think I laughed towards the very beginning in the orphanage, where the main who plays the main character. I can't even remember. It's the big guy.
Well, the Big Show.
Yeah, is a Big Show.
Yeah, the wrestler Big Show, also known as Paul White.
Okay. He's like, you tried being 6'7" and 270 pounds at 12 years old. Like that's kind of funny.
Right.
And then again, there's more fart jokes there too, like where he farts really loud and it's like, okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and then cuts to the bathroom and there's like a lot of farting and shitting sounds from the bathroom, and then the nun that runs the orphanage steps out.
Right. That I mean, there was a chuckle here and there, but
yeah, I mean, I didn't get a genuine laugh out of that. I was like, okay, that's kind of funny because that kind of humor is funny on kind of a very base level, but it wasn't really that creative in terms of a joke.
I'm just saddened that this was one of Dennis Farina's last movies.
Yes.
there are so many better potential options. And actually, looking at his credits, he didn't go out in on with a very good last few films. It makes me sad.
Yeah. Anyway, enough about that one.
Yeah. Moving on to the finale of the week, and a film that was, in my opinion, almost as awesome as Abraxas.
It was good.
Santo and the Blue Demon versus Dracula and the Wolfman.
This is kind of everything you would want. This movie delivers everything you would want from a movie with that title.
And by the way, we watched it unsubtitled because as of now, there is no subtitled version of this film legally available anywhere.
Right. So you kind of have to go with the context. Like I understand Spanish marginally well, but they said it in their native language here, so it was kind of hard to follow most of it. So I only understood about a third of the dialogue.
Right, but the thing is, context is really all you need. This film isn't exactly one. This isn't like watching something, really wordy. This is not The Iceman Cometh.
No.
And it doesn't have to be. It's very simple. Santo is badass, and Dracula and the Wolfman are brought to life by this crazy demonic. I guess you would call him an hunchbacky kind of guy, and basically the forces of evil are trying to kidnap people, and Santo turns to help from his rival and sometimes friend, the Blue Demon, and the two of them punch the fuck out of all of the demons from hell.
Yeah,
that's the plot.
That's the plot, and it is very inventively low budget. I mean, you can tell like it's almost no budget movie, but they do a lot of creative stuff with special effects when they have to, including like splicing images together and whatnot. But it's got this delightfully cheap air about it that doesn't feel like it's cheapened by it, but they made really good use of what they had.
The movie was made in '73, and it really does reflect, if you compare it to, say, the Hammer horror films that were coming out around that time, like there's Dracula 8071.
Yeah.
I think it's called. It's 72, Dracula 8072.
Okay.
And very similar in actually both budget level and quality. So there's a definite influence from there. There's a good amount of blood, considering these movies were in general intended for children.
Yeah, it's pretty violent.
Yeah,
during the ritual that resurrects Dracula, who, as we discussed when we watched it, is fly as hell.
Oh yeah, the guy that casts as Dracula is. I would bet you if you look at his film credits, he's probably played the prototypical Latin lover more often than he's played Dracula.
He's probably played Dracula more than once, also.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised.
He's got that Dracula look about him, from the eyebrows to the face structure to everything.
Yeah, I'm actually pulling up his film credits to see what. Oh yeah, he's played Dracula on a couple occasions, and by the way, in another Santo film, Santo and Dracula's Treasure.
Did they team up in that one?
Probably not, but that would be awesome if they did.
That would be awesome.
Here, the plot of Santo and Dracula's Treasure. Mexican wrestler El Santo invents a time machine. After somebody uses the machine to find the hidden location of Dracula's treasure, El Santo must hunt down the vampire. Okay, that sounds awesome.
That does sound awesome.
It's worth noting there are hundreds of these Mexican wrestling films, and I believe Santo appeared in at least, in fact, let me see how big was Santo's IMDb profile.
Did you tell me that even this the director of Santo and the Blue Demon versus Dracula and the Wolfman directed 140 movies?
Hold on just a second. So Santo has 53 film credits to his name from his first film credit was 1961, and his last one was 1982. So in just about 20 years, he appeared in 53 films.
Damn. That's crazy. But they seem like they're movies that are somewhat easy and fun to make. I mean,
oh yeah, and by the way, that's the number of film credits that he has on IMDb. Sometimes IMDb doesn't catch everything.
Right.
So the director of Santo in the Blue Demon versus Dracula and the Wolfman, that's a mouthful, Miguel M. Delgado. You asked me about how many credits he has. When I look up his filmography, yes, he has 140 separate film credits. Okay. His career lasted from 1941 through 1990.
Wow.
So that's a long film career for directing film. And
yeah, for sure.
Now, all, of course, looks like almost all of them appear to be Spanish language films. And, you know, I'm legitimately interested to see more of them just because of the curiosity that comes from this. I've seen a couple of Mexican wrestling films in the past. The thing about them is they are pure entertainments and a lot of fun. And this one in particular, if you're looking for a wrestling film, there are multiple scenes that just are like, we are going to show you wrestling now.
Yeah, there are just random wrestling or fight scenes in this movie.
It's worth noting that there's probably more wrestling in one of these movies than you're liable to find in an entire 3-hour presentation of Raw.
Recently, Raw's had more wrestling, but you didn't. I was going to mention this to you as well. If you want a more condensed version of Raw that has more wrestling, watch it on Hulu. Actually, cut it down to an hour and a half.
Well, I don't know. I think I'll stick to Mexican wrestling movies if I want to scratch that itch.
It's certainly wrestling in that vein really does scratch a certain sort of itch in the way it's choreographed, and it's just very, very silly. And I think that's one of the best things about this movie is it's not just wrestling matches. It actually translates into them actually fighting people in outside of the ring, especially these vampire, demons, and wolf people.
And there's some knockdown, drag out fights. The first really big fight in the film that Santo takes part in, that isn't wrestling, that is this warehouse fight that is just punching like crazy, and it's fun to watch. That clearly they put a lot of work into choreographing.
Yes,
and it reminds me a lot the types of fighting, like the scene in They Live where Roddy Piper dukes it out for 5 unbroken minutes. Except these fights go on for, I swear one of these fight scenes goes on for at least 10 minutes.
I didn't time it, but I still have the channel subscription on Amazon, so I might rewatch it and see that. Because, it's punching and throwing bales of hay and boxes and dumping stuff on top of people, and it was quite a fight in terms of the scale and choreography, like you said.
Mm-hmm. So, with that said, that was this. Do you have any closing thoughts on the film?
I don't. It kind of lost me about 3/4 of the way through. Then it got me back during the final fight scene because there was the cave. It had they make people walk across a pit of spikes and shake the plank as they're trying to do it, which was really, really funny. But overall, I had a lot of fun with it.
Absolutely, and that closes this week's version of Hawk and Ken Survive. And next week is going to be basically we've chosen a few films that are fairly well considered to be the worst or some of the worst films by otherwise well-respected directors.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that one.
And so I'm sure that'll be interesting, and we'll go ahead and reconvene at that time.
All righty.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and have a good day.
So long.